Battle of Waterloo, 1815, in round about 4-5 minutes, GCSE warfare through time, short revision clips. This is going to be quite difficult to do, it's going to be quite narrative, but remember, as far as key battles are concerned, they're case studies. You are looking at developments in warfare through the lens of battles such as Waterloo to find examples for changes and developments and things that are going on in warfare during this period. It might be useful if you have a map of the battlefield at Waterloo as you're studying this, but let's go. We're in June 1815, Waterloo is in Belgium, and it is a battle between the British Army, led by the famous Duke of Wellington, and the French Army, commanded by the famous Napoleon Bonaparte. And this contest brings to an end the Napoleonic Wars, which have been going on since 1803. The location of the battlefield is really quite important, which shows continuity from times centuries before, where location has been a massive factor in how battles have turned out and why they've started in particular places. Wellington had a defensive strategy. He knew basically this was about survival and holding on until his smaller British force could be reinforced by the Prussian army of General Blucher, which would arrive at some point later in the day. So, knowing this, he drew his troops up on the reverse side of a ridge which ran across the battlefield, which provided a bit of protection against Napoleon's artillery. He spread his forces out across the ridge so that he couldn't be outflanked, and he had two crucial positions manned by his best soldiers in front of his forces. Those are at the Chateau of Hougoumont and the farmhouse at La Haye-Sainte, and this hopefully would help to break up any French assault on his forces. Battle started when Napoleon sent his infantry forward to try and get the buildings at Hougoumont. These were famously ferociously defended by the British Coldstream Guards for the rest of the day, and the chateau at Hougoumont was never captured. In the early afternoon, about 1 o'clock, the French artillery began firing at the British lines. However, Wellington had positioned his soldiers cleverly on the reverse side of the ridge running across the battlefield, so many French artillery shots just went over the heads of Wellington's men. But additionally, heavy rain had also soaked the battlefield, so the cannonballs landing in front of the British forces just buried in the mud. They didn't bounce on the ground towards the British troops. So the artillery attack failed. Napoleon ordered his infantry forward, but they were forced back at first by the British cavalry. Heavy losses on both sides at this point. We get to around late afternoon, about 4 o'clock. Napoleon pushes his cavalry forward, repeatedly charging the British forces, but Wellington cleverly chose to put his infantry into squares, and they fended off the French cavalry attacks using muskets and bayonets. The hollow centres of the infantry squares provided a place where wounded soldiers could go, where commanders could still issue commands. So that tactic of infantry squares worked pretty well. At about 6 o'clock, you get the French taking control of the buildings at La Haye-Sainte, which is a bit of a blow, and suddenly the British forces were a bit more vulnerable to the French attack. So this is where Wellington famously went along, riding up and down the line of his troops, urging his soldiers to keep their nerve, and I and every Englishman on this field must stand and die on the spot which we now occupy. So he bolstered morale at the crucial point of battle, and as a result of which the British soldiers did manage to stand firm and repel the French attackers. By this point, the relief is arriving. The Prussian forces under General Blucher are starting to get there in increasing numbers. The tide of battle was turning. Napoleon rolls the dice for the last time, ordered his Imperial Guard forward to fight with Wellington's infantry, but once again the British soldiers heroically endure, and by about 8 o'clock the battle was over. French forces were tiring, fresh Prussian forces were now turning up in greater numbers, and Wellington waved his men forward to clear the battlefield as the French headed off tired and defeated. Casualties were huge. We're talking about somewhere in the region of about 50,000 men laying dead. So we are starting to see now battles, perhaps, where we're seeing huge numbers of casualties because armies are bigger and the weapons are getting more technologically advanced. Wellington and Waterloo become immortalised in British military history, and of course Napoleon's desire for an empire across Europe is completely destroyed by this battle.